Daily. Today is a Monday. Again, back to the show is Yael Cabilly. How you doing? And we've also bring Michal in, which is your business partner in the firm as well. Is that correct?
Right. Michal is my partner at Fortinet, my second company.
So not just happy with one, we've got two companies. That's good. Michal, do you want to give the audience a little bit of background on yourself?
Yes, sure. So I'm originally a lawyer for almost 25 years now. I used to be the VP Business Development and General Counsel of an international company named Caesarstone until 1.5 years ago, or a little bit more, before I joined Yael to establish Fortinet. Before that, I was a general counsel of another international company. Back more, less interesting today, but 25 years behind. My expertise brought to Fortinet relates to merger and acquisitions as well as commercial law. So this is in short about myself.
Excellent. I think if you could turn your audio down just a little bit, because I think my mic is feeding back onto your computer.
Okay.
If you could turn the sound down in the room, that would be great. Yael, obviously you've been on the show a few times. Do you want to do a reintroduction to yourself?
Yes, I'm the owner of Cabilly & Co., a law firm that deals with e-commerce issues, suspensions, and IP issues, trademark registration, etc. And I'm also co-founder of Fortinet, together with Michal and a third partner, where we deal with the sale of Amazon accounts, mostly mid to large accounts. And we help sellers going through the process really from A to Z, from the moment they think about an exit until they actually get the money.
That makes sense. And we know that I'm muting the mics in the background. Basically, we know that the situation with a sale of a company is very stressful for both parties, and there's also got to be kept there in terms of confidence for the buyer. So basically, you're spending most of your time, I'm imagining, I haven't sold a company personally, but from speaking with other people, is that you've always got that constant thing, is the buyer happy? You're always chasing to maintain the confidence there. So I've got a series of questions, but what do you find is the most important impact on a deal when it comes to managing, like we say, managing the customer? Or basically you're nursing this buyer over the line, and at any point it can go wrong. So what do you think are the most important metrics from day one to manage those relationships, to make sure it ends up going to the right way to completion, and there isn't, for instance, a little bit of a bait and switch going on and making adjustments through the deal to make changes? How do you lock that process in? I'll go to Michal first.
Okay. So like in any relationship, communication is the basis. Smooth, transparent communication. This is the most important thing in the process. Seller needs to be prepared for the process, willing to disclose everything which is related to the business, which anyhow becomes known eventually during the diligence. So the first steps that one should take is preparing his financial properly and understand where he's standing, hopefully without missing any important information, which is then be able to be disclosed to potential buyers and start a negotiation over the business. In case that we start presenting some business and eventually it appears that financials, for example, or other important information is not as presented, this causes some difficulties in the transaction. And then again, transparency is the name of the game. Another thing which is important before even starting the process is making sure that the seller is in the right timing for him to start the process, to sell the business. We do see in some cases where sellers start a process without thinking thoroughly whether this is indeed the right timing, that they find themselves afterwards in the deal process or the negotiation not fully satisfactory from what they get and where they can take it to. So it is important to understand whether this is the right time. Maybe to elaborate a bit about this, when we say what is the right time, what does it mean? So first of all, it's not there isn't one rule for it. It's not a formula according which you can know exactly that this is the right timing for you to sell, and it depends. In many aspects, it is a subjective decision. Depends on the appetite for risk, how much energy the seller has to still continue and running the business. There are some very clear guidelines that as a business should be better sold when it is in a growing trend, in a growth trend. If a sale process commences at the time that the business is flat or going down, or if we started process at the time in which the business grows and then during the process it declines, then it makes the deal much less pleasant. Multiple tend to be lower. Buyer and seller can be disappointed of the results. So this is another thing to consider about timing.
I was going to say,
yeah.
With timing now, for instance, COVID, it can go one or two ways. You know, there are businesses, especially on our agency, have taken off 3-4x in some cases, and some people have been affected as well on a downturn because they're not selling essential goods. But how do you, on both sides, say you're pre-negotiating a deal mid-COVID, suddenly you sell hand sanitizer as an example, or something that is related to the medical world that is much beneficial, and you get this unexpected spike in sales. Does there become a point of negotiation at the table? It's just saying, well, we're having trouble keeping everything in stock. Our sales are doubled or tripled. We're 6 months into this process of negotiation and getting ready to close the deal. Does that change the pathway? Because I'm sure if they were selling non-essential goods and the sales nosedive, the buyer is suddenly going to be wanting to have either a renegotiation or back out of the situation.
Yeah.
So
okay. So yeah, you want to go?
No. Okay. I'll take it, and then you will continue. Okay. So yeah. So indeed, when external circumstances are changing during the deal process or the deal negotiation, it may impact the deal itself. We have several examples that we came across in relation to COVID-19 impact of the business along a deal negotiation or other stage of the deal process. And then it depends on the parties. It depends. In general, we do tend to find solutions for this. So either deal price is adjusted to reflect the change in the business, whereby on one hand the seller sees additional. Let's say in case that the COVID-19 positively impacted the business. So in such case, a seller came and asked for additional payment. From seller side, it seems like the right thing to do, since the business now shows a graded profit for the last 12 months. On the other hand, from buyer point of view, there is no clearance that the same trend will continue once the COVID-19 ends.
So my point is, it's a one-way street. Effectively, if your sales go down due to COVID, I want to back out. If your sales go up due to COVID, well, I don't want to change. Do you see what I mean? It's a buyer's market in that sense. Because who does that make sense to you? Why would you, if you see someone's sales tanking mid-sale, you either want to renegotiate because that would be the clever thing to do, or you'll pass on the deal. But on the shoe on the other foot, you are not going to want to move, are you? Because you know that it's probably just COVID related and that will change in the future. So how do you deal with a sticky situation like that?
So here again, it depends. Eventually, when someone buys a business, it doesn't look just after his nose. You look for the long term and analyze whether the fundamental of the business really justify this a certain valuation. Everyone can understand that COVID-19 is a temporary situation, and the expectation that this will not stay for the long term, unless it did had some impact, which may be viewed as long-lasting impacts, or, by the way, positive impacts or negative impacts. So eventually, first of all, without both sides meeting of wishes, meeting of will, no deal will happen until it is a binding deal. But in case that the deal made sense in the first place, we do see that both parties tend to find solution to reflect those changes in reality during COVID. Such adjustment can be either none. I mean, either both parties get to the understanding that they should better ignore what happened during COVID, either addition of payment in different structures, long deferred payments during a longer time going forward that will be payable only in case that those improvements, let's say, are really long lasting, or some adjustments in price down. It depends on the case.
Makes sense. Yael, do you want to add anything here?
Yeah, I mean, just to give examples, we actually had cases where at the beginning of the COVID period, we had a case where we started the deal, everything was signed, and then the buyer backed off, and then eventually the seller sold his business for a higher amount at the end. But we also had a deal where the account was actually really growing, and the seller actually showed that it's growing, and it's not growing only because of the COVID. It's growing, and the buyer will get something better than was initially negotiated. So in those cases, you, as Michal said, you actually show, you actually find a structure that will deal with that. Okay, if it's growing, you'll get a certain percentage of the the growth. So that's one of the structure you can find, but I think there's no deal where you can't find a way to do it. We think together of what will happen, what has happened. We try to look at Google Trends and things like that, and then we find a structure that deals with it. At the end, we were surprised. We thought that during COVID there will be no deals and things will change. What happened is actually the exact opposite. There are many more buyers in the market right now. The market is booming. I guess everybody understands that the e-commerce is here to stay. Many of the retail, people who went to the stores physically are now buying online. So the market is changing actually in that direction. Of course, there are, when you go down during that period, this can affect it. But right now, where we are in June, most of the businesses that went down are now back on track. Many of them are higher than they were before. That's a situation right now. There are very few that are not selling, only those related to, transportation or things like that.
What advice would you give to a lot of background noise here? 1 second. What advice would you mind just turning the volume down on your computer where you haven't got headphones in? That's my voice feeding back. where was I going to go with this? What was my train of thought? Yeah, so going back to the COVID thing, let's just say you've got a brand that's doing really well. Their sales have gone up 2 to 3x, but they don't have the capital to keep in stock, or down to losing their rankings. Do you see what I mean? So let's just say they're looking to sell their business. A product business is heavy on capital in terms of inventory. Suddenly you haven't got that allocated cash on hand. You know, you got to ship in like X amount of stock because the sales are taken off. What advice do you give? Because in one hand you want to keep it in stock and retain your rankings and stuff, but on the other hand you might have to go and borrow money mid deal to make this happen, to keep. Does that make sense? So where would you say that's a bit of a predicament? What would you advise there?
Michal, you wanna? Yeah.
It's my
You're on
okay.
mute. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, you control the mic here. It's nice. Nice power. So I think that this is not something which is specific to the COVID-19 issue, but in general, it is. I mean, it is important to maintain momentum with the business. Of course, in order to maintain ranking, you should have sufficient inventory on hand and meet demand. So optimizing inventory sufficiency with demand and price is always an important thing to do. And naturally, if a seller, business owner, believes of his ability to really sell inventory that he can acquire, then it will be wise to make sure that he is able to obtain this inventory and fund it. There are different funding solutions for cash flow, and it is advisable to use them as long as there is a sufficient confidence in the business success. So for sure, this is a good thing to do during COVID-19 and always.
So I'll turn your mics off again. So would you go back to the buyer? Because my point is, let's just say the buyer wants to buy the company. You're in the middle of COVID-19. Your sales have gone up 2 or 3x, right? So you're going to need equally that amount of cash on hand again to keep in stock. Would you have that open conversation and say, hey, look, we're trying to sell this business to you, but equally at the same time, we're going to stock out unless we keep supplying demand. What is your take on it, to bring them into the conversation? Because I'll give you another example. We help our clients get ready to sell from a PPC perspective. Everyone knows my stance. If you go through the agency with us and you get an exit, congratulations, take some money off the table. I prefer them to tell us that they want to sell the company so we can help them prepare, because we need to make sure that the way that we operate in terms of the strategy for their PPC is going to be very important, right? And normally people want to retain profit in the company, so they're less aggressive and they're less likely to launch products. So then we would adjust accordingly for that, so their books look better and it's more impressive to the people they buy from. That's just standard. But my point is, the predicament that you've got is that on one hand, someone wants to buy the company and it's great, but what if you don't have the cash on hand? Would you have that conversation with the buyer and say, look, I'm in the caught between stools here. If I stock out, that's going to be a red flag. But if I keep it in stock, I then got to go and borrow money to do so. What can we do in the middle? Is there like a bridging loan that you would do in that period? I know there's funding out there, but would that speed up the deal? Would that slow down the deal? And would you have those kind of conversations with the buyer?
So, yeah, you want to answer it or you want me to?
Yeah, I mean, we there are a lot of cases where we we share with the specific buyers the situation we're in. You have to remember that in those transactions, the buyer doesn't buy the company. He buys the assets. So even just remember that if you bought the inventory, he will pay for the inventory. So he doesn't pay, he doesn't buy the whole company. He buys, there's a multiple on your profit plus the inventory. So whatever you buy, the buyer will pay for it later. Now, if during the deal you need to buy inventory, yes, I would share that with the specific buyer if you're in advanced stages. If you don't have a buyer yet, I would go for lending. It really depends on the stage you're on. We share with the buyers not only situation related to inventory, but also we had a case, for example, where there was a suspension during the sale process, and the seller was hesitating which way he should go, whether he should relaunch the product. There was some thinking around it, and there were several strategies that the seller could take. Now, since he's in the sale process, the buyer is the one that will have to deal with it in the future. So usually we would discuss it, we would do a discussion with the buyer, and together we'll decide on the strategy, or the buyer decides on the strategy if it's in later stages of the due diligence. So I mean, we really believe in communications. Most of the buyers are smart people. They know how those sellers live. They know about all kinds of problems. Michal was talking earlier about being transparent and showing everything. Many sellers are afraid to show problems. We see that a lot. Or to show like kind of gray hat, not black hat, but gray hat techniques. I think that the buyers have seen it all. And whatever you have that's been going on, the buyer will know it anyway. So you should talk about it. If it's, rebates that you're doing, and that's okay, you should show it to the buyer that you're not the first to do rebates. If it's, reviews, the way you got the reviews, or I don't know, or VAT or tariffs. That's also something that we sometimes, people discover later. Sales tax. These are things that you should speak with the buyer, show everything in advance. Everything should be on the P&L, because anyway, the buyer will see it, and in any case, you're gonna discuss it. If you're not transparent, on the other hand, and you're deliberately hiding something, this can kill a deal.
That's what I thought. I'm going to say some hellos quickly. So quick hello to Mia, who's in the feed. Ev's here, Oksana, Ricky, Nick says another good podcast. Good work, Danny and team. Bipim is here. Arnard here. Jeff Stick is here. Owen Burrows says hello. Cindy Norton's here. Sav's here. Michael, Andrew Kramer, Gloria's here as well. Laura Woods, Herb's back. Lee Chapman as well. We've also got some questions here. Sorry, because they're not all coming up in the feed. Saibi says, what is the minimum age of a business that a buyer will start to look at 12 months and above? So normally you go for a trailing 12 months at least, wouldn't you?
So I guess this affects the multiple. I mean, a buyer can buy anything, even something of 6 months, but the multiple will be affected. Some buyers prefer like at least 2-3 years, and some will buy one of 1 year, but then instead of a multiple of 3.3, it will be 2.8. Really depends of the case, but I wouldn't say a 12 months isn't sellable. Really depends.
Okay, so turn your mics off again. Alex Mitchell is said in the feed, if the buyer wants a split cash equity, is it normal to ask for additional percentage multiple versus 100% cash deal? Question, e.g. 3% multiple for an all-in cash deal versus 3.5% multiple for a cash equity split deal. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, in many of the cases, you see two types of offers: either cash or cash plus, some split. Maybe 20% deferred and then 80% paid cash. That's also something that we see. And yes, it can affect the multiple. If you go to your buyers and you say, I want only cash, and I'm a $5 million account, then in some cases the buyer will tell you, well, this affects my cash, and so it affects the multiple. I'm willing to pay more, but if it's deferred.
Michal, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, maybe just to say that we don't see as many equity deals. I mean, deals in which the seller maintain equity in the business. There is no, in general, I would think that that there should be room for such deals, but mostly what we see is that both from buyers and sellers side, usually the inclination is to just sell the whole business and then just discuss payment terms.
Okay. Another question here from Nick. Is the multiple affected based on where the business is registered, i.e. UK limited company versus US company? I'd definitely say your multiples will be higher in the US than Europe, right? But does it matter where the limited company resides, whether it's an LLC in the US or?
We don't see a difference actually, because at the end of the day, as Yael mentioned, what buyers buy are assets. Those assets would usually be accounts, Amazon accounts in Amazon.com or in European market, and it doesn't matter whether the operator, the hosting entity for those assets was originally established in whatever country. So we don't see these impact the multiples.
Okay, but on the flip side of that, my question off the back of Nick's question there, because he was comparing which territory the company resides in, right? Would you say it's easier to sell a US-based company that sells mainly on .com, where most of the revenue comes from, versus selling in the EU?
So your question was whether it is easier to sell a business that is focused on .com as opposed to business that sells on the EU. So here again, it depends not only on the market, but on general other terms. At the end of the day, with good performance and good growth trajectory, the multiple would be the same, let's say, if the terms are equal. The European market is a good market, not as strong as the US, of course, but if you are in the right product with the right long-term assets, like reviews and ratings, then also business in the EU will get good multiples.
Great. Yeah, do you have anything to add here? Let me unmute your mic. Yeah.
Yeah, many buyers see it as an opportunity, the fact that you're not on both platforms. I mean, they would buy a US account and they'll take it to Europe. Or they buy a European account and they'll take it to the US. So for them, it's an opportunity just being on one of them. But I agree with Michal. I mean, it's not the US one is not worth more than the European one.
Gotcha. Saibi says, one second. Saibi says, what EBITDA multiple would be relevant for an Amazon business?
So who start? I'll go. I guess it's between usually 2 and 4 in average, but it really depends of the business and the circumstances. The average, they say the average is around 3. But the circumstances can be how old is the account, how many ASINs. If it's growing or declining, that really affects the multiple of in a sale. What else? The competition, the reviews. If if you have good reviews or not. If you have very few reviews or a lot of reviews. If you're a bestseller or not. Many circumstances.
Michal, anything you'd like to add here?
I think that Yael covered this very well, and I agree. It is being examined on a case-by-case basis, the multiple issue. I would say I do think that it is worthwhile to mention that when looking on multiples, you should prefer building long-term assets with the business rather than only short-term gains that leads to a higher profit, which is important, of course, as well. But when buyer look at the business, they will, on one hand, measure the SDE, the seller discretionary earning, the profit, which is then multiplied by the multiple, but they will also examine the long-term assets. Okay, so there's the reviews, the product, the uniqueness of the product, etc.
Cool. It comes into Mia's question as well. Which deals are more common, asset sale or company sale? And do buyers buy brands without an account, just the brands and the listing? You're nodding furiously there, Yael, so I'm going to give this one to you.
You're controlling my mic.
Yeah.
So I forgot the. No, I'm kidding. So they buy the assets. They usually, the great majority, just buy the assets. They just don't buy the company. We do see cases where they buy the brand, meaning the listing plus the brand and the trademark, and they transfer it to their account. But in most cases, the migration is much easier when you buy the account, because in that case, you simply change the credentials, you change the ownership of the account, and then you just continue. And it's extremely smooth. You need to get Amazon's permission. You need to know how to transfer it, but it's smooth. Whereas if you transfer the listings to another account, you need to take out the inventory, change the labels, put it back to FBA on the other account. So this can take a month or even more, and sometimes you lose the PPC campaign. So that makes it more complicated. So I guess most deals are deals of assets where you sell the account, the entire account.
Cool. In terms of a deal killer, give me 2 or 3 things that are an absolute deal killer, starting with you, Michal.
Okay. So an absolute deal killer would be significant IP infringement, something that actually kills the business, and this is why it kills the deal. Maybe as long as the business is not killed, a deal should not be killed. It comes together. So for example, we had a case. It changed to be a case. It started as a deal turned to a case. So a very nice deal with a very nice business, good profit, which only in the very last part of the deal, it appeared that there is a major infringement of IP, which led to that the deal was broken, and the seller is now changing the product to make sure that he does not infringe an IP. Other things, maybe Yael referred before to transparency. It is important, mistake, bona fide mistakes, honest mistakes. These are things that everyone can do, and everyone understands that this can happen. And all of these are solvable. So if something comes out later in the process, which was not known initially, but it was the result of a genuine mistake, it is okay. If this was something that was hidden purposely, this may kill a deal. Those deals do need some level of trust between seller and buyer, because as much as sellers will conduct due diligence over buyer business, there is always some room for reliance upon seller presentation and statements. So some level of trust is very important. Maybe one more point that is worthwhile mentioning here relates to partners, businesses that are owned by partners. I think that it is very important that partners will be aligned when they start a process. We do see some cases where partners get into difficult situation in which they do not get along together anymore. They have different interests or different needs related to the business, and then when their dispute or their problem in communication impacts their ability to communicate with the buyer and to sell the business, this ends with a lower valuation for the business eventually. We had a few cases in which we literally helped such partners to solve their problems before we even started the process, because we understood that they cannot even communicate to decide who is doing what and whether they want to sell and when. So we found ourselves investing, in some cases, lots of time sitting with them to get to an agreement that relates to the sale itself. It is important not to make the dirty laundry in front of the buyer, and just cooperate for this mutual target of selling the business in the best manner possible. So some patience is required, and to contain each other emotions, just to allow this process to get along.
Sounds good. Yael, I'll bring you into. Is there anything you want to add here?
Yeah. So regarding going back to IP, I guess not all IP issues stop a deal. We had several deals where in the middle of the deal, there was an issue, for example, a false complaint for a design patent.
This is what I was going to say. What about sabotaging? 1 second, yeah.
Right.
The point I was going to get to is when people sabotage the listings, review bombings, fake IP claims, with those attempts, what would happen there in this situation when you know that this is all fake? How do you get that across to the buyer and make sure they stay comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, most buyers in the market are very knowledgeable on Amazon. They know Amazon, they sell on Amazon, they go through the same things that you go through. So as long as you're open, you should be fine. We had several deals where there was a false complaint for example, design patent. Somebody with the design that did not look the same filed a complaint. What we did is on my law firm, on my other hat, we dealt with the design patent issue. We wrote an opinion to Amazon explaining that it's not infringing, and within a day it was back on. When this happens during a deal, you need to deal with it as soon as possible. You would do that if it's your account anyway, but especially during a deal. We had a seller who was trying to deal with it alone, and then it took some time. So maybe it's best to take someone who knows what he's doing. But just you should know that generally on Amazon, most of the problems that are raised are resolved. I look at my firm and I see that more than 95% of the problems that we see are eventually resolved. So that's something that you should remember also during a deal. When it happens, it's really scary. When your account is suspended during a deal, it's really unpleasant. But remember, unless you did something, really extreme, you're probably going back on. And this leads me to the second, deal breaker that Michal started talking about, and that's extreme black hats. So, for example, and I'm being really extreme, we see that very rarely, but if 95% of your reviews are incentivized, and you bought all of them, then, and if the buyer finds out about it, then that's a deal breaker. That can be a deal breaker. Some of the buyers are very sensitive to reviews. So, there are some practices that are very common, and the first reviews are usually come from somewhere. But on the extreme side, having extreme black hats and manipulating everything on your account, that is something that could be a deal breaker. So there are mechanisms that the buyers have very often to make sure that they don't buy the account and then a month later, all the reviews are wiped out or something like that. So there's some kind of, for example, stability payments. Something like, let's say 10% of the payment depends on the fact that the revenue and the profit remains at least the same, or maybe 10% less, but nothing dramatic happens. So the buyers think about it. You should think about it. I think that most of the sellers don't do it anyway, and they're fine. And this goes back to transparency, showing what they're doing. But the extreme black hat will probably be revealed later. So that's a deal breaker.
Cool. So, Michal, is there anything you want to add here?
No, I think it was clear.
All right.
Clear
So
and
if
well explained.
if we're to wrap here, give us 3 to 4 takeaways that the listeners should take on board when it comes to selling. Maybe take 2 each.
Yeah. So you mean for sellers, things to get?
For sellers who are looking to sell their business, what would you say? A couple of things from you, real key standouts from you, and then we'll pass the same question to Yael as well.
Yeah. So first of all, know yourself. Okay, you should know what do you want. It sounds maybe it sounds a bit funny, but it is very important. Know yourself. Know what you really want to get from your journey in this current Amazon account of yours. Do you want to keep on managing it for the long term or mid term? Is it important for you to sell it very quickly? Whether you have patience and you prefer higher multiple on the account of additional time of running the business, whether you have a partner that you have issues to solve with. This is very important, just to make sure that you are not, that one is not, one wish and intention and manner of action is not being impacted from any change in a monthly result of the business. So you need some to take a decision, and stand for it. This is one thing that I would say. Another thing is get ready for a life-changing event, which is therefore somewhat stressful, but eventually very much a beneficiary. It gives you, I mean, a lot of satisfaction. It's a huge achievement, which requires dedication during the process itself, patience. Many times we meet sellers that this is for them the first time in their life of such a deal, which really make a change in their life. All of a sudden then they not only see beautiful numbers on their financials, but they actually take, in some cases, millions of dollars back home. So you need to be prepared for this intensive process, which brings a huge satisfaction in the end. Choose your consultants. Have the right consultants around you to make sure that you're well covered here. That you're equipped with the right experience. And maybe my last takeaway: keep on managing the business as usual. Don't do any unique, extraordinary things just for the deal itself. Keep on managing the business. Don't launch new product for the first time just because you think that it will make some buyer happier, unless this is a part of a long-term strategy, something that you would do anyway. And try to make sure that the business will keep on growing until, during the process, and also hopefully will grow after the buyer will buy it. And maybe in that, with respect to that, just to add maybe one more notion, be prepared to leave some money on the table for the buyer. You want a happy buyer. A happy seller is someone that make a good deal for himself, but afterwards, leave a happy buyer with his business. And we see many buyers, many sellers that this is their view. They understand that they build. This is their baby, their business that they sell, and they are happy to see it successful also when it is in the buyer's hand.
Makes sense. I'll pass the same question over to Yael. 1 second. There you go.
Yeah, I mean, so Michal was talking about acting as usual, which sounds obvious, but it actually isn't. We see a lot of cases where, due to the sale, people, stop launching, or they used to launch every couple of months, and then the business starts declining. And selling a declining business is not easy. You would get lower multiples, and it affects the entire deal, and it can take months to revive that business and selling it appropriately. So we see some cases where the sellers feel that it's the end and they're not on it, they're not on the business. They don't buy enough inventory because they say, why would I invest now? I'm selling the business anyway. You shouldn't. It feels like it. You can see it at the end on the P&L. You can see it at the end how the business looks like, and you should always remember it's not easy to do. Of course, it's easy to say, not easy to do, because you have the sale in your mind. But it's very important, and it's part of the process. The buyer wants something that acts as usual. Another thing we discussed many times during this hour is transparency. Be always transparent. And the third thing, I guess, is flexibility. Some sellers come to the process with something in mind. Somebody will buy my company, and then they discover that they're actually buying assets, or I want a multiple of 5, or I want only cash, or they have something in mind, and things are changing even during the deal. What we said about COVID, we had to be flexible. We had to think outside the box. We had to think about other possible transactions, other possible mechanism. And I think that when you have a flexible buyer and you have a flexible seller, there should be a deal, whatever happens. So that's also very important. And we rarely see deals where everything is super smooth and there's no surprises and nothing happens. Oh, it's Amazon. You and I know something always happens. So be flexible and have a good communication, good vibe, and I guess you should be okay.
Cool. Well, let's wrap that there. What's the best way for you guys, for people to reach you guys?
Best way to reach us, you can just Google Fortinet. It's fortinet.net. And email is yael@fortinet.net or michal@fortinet.net.
Cool. Thanks, guys, for coming in today. A couple of other messages here. Kimberly says, I usually watch the replay due to my time zone, but today I'm awake early in the day. Hello from Redondo Beach, California. Oxy says, what great info. Thanks again, Danny, for doing this. Have we missed anyone else out? I'm just trying to see if we've missed. There's one last question here. What are the lowest levels of revenue and margins that buyers will be even to start to look at on an Amazon account? And is there an upper revenue limit?
There is no upper revenue limit. There's a buyer for every seller. We sold 8 figures accounts, and there's a market for smaller accounts. Some accounts of 50,000 are also sold, and we also see empty accounts sold. So I guess everything can be sold, and there's a market for all of them.
Makes sense. Cool, guys. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back here tomorrow, 4 p.m. BST. Stay home, stay safe, take care of your family. Much love. Take care. See you tomorrow.
Thank you, Danny.
Thank you very much.